I need to tell someone about this because I'm still shaking and I don't even know where to start except that my mother-in-law threw an entire glass of red wine in my face at Christmas dinner in front of 30 people and told me servants don't get to have opinions. Let me back up because this woman has been making my life hell for years. But what happened at Christmas was so beyond anything I could have imagined. I'm Mina, and I married Nathan 3 years ago. His family is old Virginia money, like country club memberships and debutante balls and knowing everyone's genealogy back to the Revolutionary War. I grew up in a regular neighborhood in Norfolk with a single mom who worked 2 jobs. Nathan and I met at VCU and he swore his family would love me. They did not love me. His mother Helen made it clear from day one that I was trash who trapped her precious son. She told Nathan's sister Savannah that I probably poked holes in condoms to get pregnant, which is insane because we don't even have kids yet. When I got pregnant 2 years ago and miscarried at 8 weeks, Helen told people at her garden club that I probably made it up for attention. Nathan heard about it from his cousin and confronted her. And she just smiled and said, well, if there had been a real pregnancy, surely there would have been a real baby. But Christmas dinner is when everything exploded. Helen hosts this massive dinner every year at their house in the West End, this huge colonial thing with the circular driveway and everything. She'd been texting Nathan for weeks about how we needed to come early to help set up, which really meant she wanted me to help the caterers in the kitchen while everyone else drank champagne. Fine. Whatever. I can handle being treated like staff. What I couldn't handle was getting there and seeing Nathan's ex-girlfriend Ophelia sitting in the living room. Ophelia is everything Helen wanted for Nathan. Her family owns half the vineyards in Charlottesville. She went to Sweetbriar. She knows which fork to use for oysters. They dated for 2 years before college, and Helen still has their prom photo on her mantle. I'm not kidding. Their prom photo. Nathan's asked her to take it down about 50 times. I walked in and Ophelia gave me this smile and said, "Oh, Mina, Helen didn't tell me you'd be here." Which was such BS because obviously Helen had invited her specifically to mess with me. Nathan looked as confused as I was and asked his mom what was going on, and Helen just breezed past saying Ophelia is family and always will be. The dinner setup was where things got really ugly. Helen had place cards at this long formal dining table, and I watched her put Ophelia's card right next to Nathan's seat. My card was at the far end of the table near the kitchen door. I said something like, "Hey Helen, I think there's been a mistake with the seating." And she turned around and said, "No mistake, dear. I seated everyone exactly where they belong." Nathan grabbed the cards and started switching them around, and Helen lost it. Started yelling about how I've ruined every family event with my presence, how I have no class or breeding, how she's tried so hard to teach me proper etiquette, but I'm incapable of learning. Said I dress like I shop at a gas station and talk like I never finished high school. Nathan was yelling back at her and his dad Charles was trying to calm everyone down, but Helen just kept going. She said Nathan was the most promising of all her children until he met me. Said I got my hooks in him and dragged him down to my level. Said the family has standards and I don't meet a single one of them. Then she looked at me and said, "When I seat you near the kitchen, it's because that's where you're comfortable, isn't it? With the help?" I was trying so hard not to cry because I knew that's what she wanted. Nathan was furious and said we were leaving, but then Helen said if we left we'd be uninvited from all future family events. Not just asked to skip them, uninvited. Banned. Nathan's trust fund is controlled by his parents until he's 35, and Helen reminded him of that right there in front of everyone. Said if we left, she'd make sure Charles cut off his access. So we stayed. I sat in my assigned seat at the end of the table near the kitchen, but it gets worse because Helen didn't even put a regular chair there for me. She'd brought up one of the plastic patio chairs from the garage, and that's what I sat on while everyone else had the nice upholstered dining chairs. Savannah noticed and looked horrified, but didn't say anything. Nathan's brother Archie smirked like he thought it was hilarious. Dinner was 2 hours of hell. Ophelia kept touching Nathan's arm and laughing at everything he said. Helen kept directing all conversation through Ophelia, asking her about her new job at some art gallery in DC, complimenting her dress, talking about old times when she and Nathan were together. Every time I tried to join the conversation, Helen would talk over me or just ignore me completely. The wine throwing happened during dessert. Helen was telling some story about a charity gala and mentioned that it was black tie formal, then looked directly at me and said, "Of course Mina wouldn't know what that means since I don't think she owns anything appropriate for real society events." I'd had enough at that point and said, "Actually, Helen, I know exactly what black tie means, and I've been to plenty of formal events." She laughed, actually laughed in my face and said, "Oh, sweetie, the Olive Garden doesn't count as formal dining." Some people at the table laughed too, and I felt my face get hot. I said I wasn't talking about Olive Garden, I was talking about actual formal events, and she said name one. So I brought up Nathan's law school graduation dinner, which had been at this fancy restaurant downtown, and Helen said that wasn't a real formal event. That was just Nathan being kind enough to include me in his achievement. I snapped. I said maybe if she stopped treating me like garbage for 5 seconds, she'd realize I'm not going anywhere, and she needs to accept that I'm Nathan's wife. Said I'm sick of her talking about me like I'm dirt. She scraped off her shoe. Said she's been trying to humiliate me since the day we met, and it needs to stop. Helen stood up, picked up her wine glass, walked down to my end of the table, and dumped the entire thing on my head. Red wine all over my white sweater, my hair, my face. Then she leaned down and said, "Servants don't have opinions, dear. You're here because Nathan feels sorry for you. You're street garbage he picked up out of pity, and we're all just waiting for him to take out the trash." I just sat there with wine dripping off my chin, and Helen went back to her seat like nothing happened. Nathan jumped up and started yelling at his mother, saying she'd crossed every possible line, but Helen just calmly said if I was going to be disrespectful in her home, then I deserved to be put in my place. I got up and went to the bathroom to clean up. When I came back, they were taking family photos in the living room. This is a tradition they do every Christmas. The whole family arranged on the couches and chairs. The photographer was already set up, and Helen was positioning everyone very specifically with Ophelia right next to Nathan on the couch. I started to sit on Nathan's other side and Helen said no. Mina, you can stand in the back. The family photo is for actual family members. Ophelia tried to protest, saying she didn't need to be in the photo, but Helen insisted, said Ophelia would always be part of their family regardless of Nathan's poor choices. Then Helen made Nathan and Ophelia hold hands for one of the photos. Hold hands. Nathan refused at first, but Helen said if he wanted to remain in the family and keep his trust fund, he'd do as she asked. She made them do this cheek kiss pose too, like they were still together. I was standing in the back corner next to Archie's wife, who looked embarrassed for me. After the photos, Nathan said we were leaving, and this time we actually did. Helen called after us that we weren't welcome at New Year's Eve or any spring events. Said I'd managed to ruin Christmas just like I ruin everything. We got in the car and Nathan was apologizing over and over, saying he'd talked to his dad about cutting off his mother's control over family events. But I barely heard him because I was trying not to have a full breakdown. Here's what I didn't mention earlier because it makes everything worse. This has been going on for years. Helen tells everyone I baby-trapped Nathan even though we don't have kids. She told Nathan's grandmother before she died that I wasn't really in love with Nathan, just his money. She's forgotten to invite me to multiple family events and acted surprised when I didn't show up. She planned a family vacation to their beach house last summer, and specifically told Nathan to leave me home, said wives weren't invited, just immediate family. When Nathan brought me anyway, she gave us the worst room, the one with the broken AC in July. She throws my background in my face constantly, makes comments about my mom working retail, asked me once if I even knew what a 401k was, corrects my grammar in front of people. She rewrote our wedding vows without asking because she said mine weren't eloquent enough for the family church. She's told multiple people that my daughter, if I ever have one, won't look like Nathan, so he should get a DNA test. I'm not even pregnant. At my birthday party last month, which Nathan threw at a restaurant with our friends, Helen showed up uninvited. She brought a gift that was a book about etiquette and manners, said loudly in front of everyone that she thought it might help me finally learn how to conduct myself properly, called me useless when I didn't thank her enthusiastically enough. After Christmas, Nathan's been trying to convince me that his mom will calm down, but she keeps texting him about how I disrespected her in her own home and she won't tolerate it. She sent him a long message about how Ophelia would have been the perfect daughter-in-law and it's not too late for him to fix his mistake. Told him I'm pulling him away from his real family. The next morning, Helen sent Nathan a formal written list of expectations for me if I wanted to attend future family events. Actual bullet points. Things like appropriate formal attire at all times, no speaking unless directly addressed, no contradicting family elders, acknowledgement of my lower social standing. She CC'd Charles on it like it was a work memo. Nathan was so angry he called her immediately, and they had this massive fight where she said if he'd just married Ophelia, none of this would be happening. Then 3 days after Christmas, Ophelia posted a photo on Instagram from the dinner. It was one of the posed photos where she and Nathan were holding hands. Her caption was something like always grateful for this family and their love. Helen commented with heart emojis. About 15 of their family friends liked it. I wasn't tagged and I'm not even visible in the photo because of how Helen positioned everyone. People were commenting asking if they were back together. Helen's friends from the garden club were messaging her congratulations. Nathan's aunt called to say how happy she was that he'd come to his senses. That's when I realized Helen's plan wasn't just to humiliate me. She's actively trying to break us up and push Nathan back toward Ophelia. The Christmas dinner was theater, staged specifically to show Nathan what his life could be like with someone Helen approved of. And the scary part is that Nathan's so used to his mother's manipulation that he doesn't see how calculated it all is. Yesterday, Nathan told me his parents want to have a meeting with both of us to discuss my behavior at Christmas dinner. My behavior. Like I'm the one who threw wine and humiliated someone. Nathan says we should go because maybe we can resolve this, but I don't want to sit through another session of Helen explaining why I'm not good enough for her son. Last night, Nathan and I had a huge fight about the meeting. He said I need to just apologize to his mother to keep the peace, and I lost it. Apologize for what? For existing? For not being born into the right family? For defending myself when she called me street garbage? He backtracked and said he didn't mean I should actually apologize, just that I should let her feel like she won so we can move past this. I told him there is no moving past this. His mother threw wine in my face in front of 30 people. She made him pose for romantic photos with his ex-girlfriend while I stood in the corner like furniture. She put me on a plastic chair like I wasn't worth a real seat at the table. And his solution is for me to bow down and take it so his trust fund stays intact? Nathan got all upset and said the trust fund isn't just about money, it's about maintaining family relationships. Said his mom has always been difficult, but cutting her off completely would destroy the whole family dynamic. I asked him what family dynamic. The one where everyone pretends I don't exist? Or the one where they openly mock me for not being rich enough? He didn't have an answer for that. Just kept saying that the meeting could be a chance to set boundaries and make things better. But I know exactly what's going to happen at that meeting. Helen is going to list all the ways I've failed to meet her standards, demand that I fall in line, and threatened to cut Nathan off financially if I don't comply. And Nathan is going to sit there torn between his wife and his trust fund while his mother backs us both into a corner. I'm writing this the night before we're supposed to go. Nathan's asleep, and I'm sitting here wondering if I should even show up. Part of me wants to text Helen right now and tell her exactly what I think of her and her family. But the other part of me knows that's exactly what she wants. For me to prove I'm as low class as she thinks I am. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if I can sit across from that woman without absolutely exploding. And I definitely don't know if my marriage can survive this because Nathan's still trying to fix something his mother deliberately broke. Update. Okay, so I posted yesterday about my MIL throwing wine in my face at Christmas dinner, and a lot of you said I needed to stand up for myself at this meeting with Nathan's parents. Some of you were like, just don't go. But here's the thing. Nathan was absolutely convinced this could fix everything if I just gave it a chance. So against every instinct I had, I went. We got to their house around 2 in the afternoon. Same massive colonial in the West End, same circular driveway, same feeling like I was walking into enemy territory. Charles opened the door and didn't even look at me, just nodded at Nathan and led us to the living room. Helen was sitting in this high-back chair like it was a throne. She had tea set up on the coffee table, actual china with little sandwiches arranged on a tiered thing, and I swear she'd staged it specifically to remind me I didn't belong in her world. Nathan and I sat on the couch across from her and Charles took the chair right next to Helen, a united front. Before anyone could say anything, I heard footsteps on the stairs and Ophelia walked into the room. I looked at Nathan and his face went white. He said, "What is she doing here?" Helen smiled and said Ophelia is part of this family and has every right to be present for family discussions. Ophelia sat down in the chair on Helen's other side and gave me this sympathetic look that made me want to throw something. I said I'm not doing this with her here. Helen said then, "You're welcome to leave, but Nathan will be staying because we have important matters to discuss about his future." Nathan said if Mina leaves, I leave. And Helen said that would be very foolish considering what's at stake. Charles finally spoke up and said they'd asked us here to address the situation from Christmas and find a path forward. Helen interrupted him and said, "No, we asked you here to discuss Mina's unacceptable behavior and what consequences there need to be." She looked directly at me and said I'd embarrass the family in front of 30 guests by raising my voice and causing a scene. I could not believe this. I said, "Helen, you threw wine in my face. You called me street garbage. You made me sit on a plastic chair while your son held hands with his ex-girlfriend." Helen waved her hand like she was swatting away a fly and said, "I reacted to your disrespect. You spoke to me in a tone that no one uses in my home. The seating arrangements were perfectly reasonable, and the photographs were simply maintaining family traditions." Ophelia jumped in then and said she understood this must be difficult for me, but Helen had explained that including her in family events was important for Nathan's well-being, said she and Nathan had history and connections that couldn't just be erased because he'd made an impulsive marriage. Impulsive. We'd been together for 5 years at that point. Nathan told Ophelia she needed to stay out of this, but Helen said Ophelia has valuable perspective on what Nathan needs in a partner. Said Ophelia understood the family's expectations and standards in a way I clearly never would. Then she turned to Nathan and said, "You've been struggling ever since you married her. You've been pulled away from family. Your career hasn't progressed the way it should have. You're constantly stressed about money." Nathan said that's not because of Mina. That's because you cut off my trust fund access and make everything conditional. Helen said she'd maintained his access just fine, but his poor decisions had consequences. Said if he'd married appropriately, he'd have full access to everything by now, but instead he was stuck trying to support a lifestyle his wife couldn't contribute to properly. I said, "Excuse me, I work full-time and contribute equally to our household." Helen laughed and said, "Darling, let's not pretend your income is significant." Said in their world, wives were expected to bring social connections and family standing, not just a paycheck from a strip mall. Charles said, "Helen, maybe we should focus on solutions rather than criticisms." She shot him this look and he went quiet immediately. Then she laid out what she called the path forward. Said Nathan could maintain his position in the family and his trust fund access if he agreed to certain conditions. First, I would attend family events only when specifically required, and would observe proper protocols including not speaking unless addressed directly by senior family members. Second, Nathan would attend major family events solo so he could properly network and maintain family relationships without distraction. Third, living arrangements would be reevaluated because our current apartment wasn't appropriate for someone of Nathan's standing. I said absolutely not, we're not agreeing to any of that. Helen said I wasn't being asked to agree, I was being told what the requirements were. Said Nathan could choose his marriage or his family, but he couldn't have both unless I learned my place. She looked at Nathan and said, "You're 29 years old. You should be practicing law. How exactly do you plan to provide the life you promised her without family support?" Nathan was quiet and I could see him doing the math in his head. We'd just talked about his loan payment that morning, how we had no idea how to cover it. Helen saw his hesitation and pressed harder. She said the family had connections that could get him into a good firm, could help with housing, could ensure his future children attended the right schools. Said all of that went away if he insisted on prioritizing someone who would only drag him down. Ophelia added that she'd hate to see Nathan throw away his potential. Said when they were together he'd been so driven and focused, but lately he seemed tired and stressed all the time. Said sometimes love wasn't enough if the partnership wasn't lifting both people up. I wanted to punch her right in her perfect teeth. I told Nathan we were leaving. He didn't move. I said, Nathan, let's go. We're not listening to this anymore. Helen said, see, this is exactly the problem. She can't handle adult conversations about reality. She wants you to throw away your entire future for what? Some romantic notion of true love? She looked at me and said, you know he's going to resent you eventually. When the money runs out and the bills pile up and he realizes what he gave up for you, you'll be the anchor around his neck. I stood up and said, I'm done. I'm not sitting here while you plot how to destroy my marriage with your son sitting right here. Nathan finally moved then, stood up next to me. Helen said, if you walk out that door, your trust fund access ends immediately. Not reduced, not conditional, ended. You'll be responsible for your own student loans, your own housing, everything. And don't think you can come back in a few months when reality hits. This is a one-time offer. Nathan looked at me and I could see him breaking. He said, maybe we should hear them out. Maybe there's a compromise. I said, the compromise is you choosing between your wife and your mother's money. There's no middle ground here. He said, we need to be practical about this. We can't just ignore our financial situation. Helen smiled. She actually smiled because she knew she was winning. She said, Nathan is being mature about this. Said we could start small. Maybe I could skip the New Year's Eve party and Nathan could come solo. Then we'd reevaluate from there. Nathan was nodding and I felt sick. I said, if you go to that party without me, we're done. Helen said, see Charles? See how she makes ultimatums and tries to control him? This is exactly what I've been saying. She isolates him from family and makes demands. Nathan said, Mina, don't do this. Don't make me choose. I said, you're the one making a choice right now by even considering this. Then Savannah walked in. She must have been listening from somewhere because she came in looking angry and said, Mom, what are you doing? Helen said, this doesn't concern you, Savannah. Savannah said, it does concern me because I've watched you do this for years and it's gotten completely out of control. You threw wine on her at Christmas. You made her sit on a plastic chair. You're literally trying to buy Nathan away from his wife right now. Helen's face went cold and she said, Savannah, if you can't contribute productively to this conversation, you need to leave. Savannah said, I'm not leaving. Someone needs to point out how messed up this is. Helen stood up and said, you want to talk about messed up? Let's talk about your recent credit card statements that Charles and I have been covering. Let's talk about your job at that boutique that barely pays minimum wage. You want to lecture me about family dynamics when you're living off family money? Savannah's face went red, but she said that's different. Helen said it's not different at all. Said the family supports members who uphold family values and excludes those who don't. Said if Savannah wanted to continue receiving support, she'd remember where her loyalty needed to be. Savannah looked at Nathan and said, are you really going to let them do this? Are you going to choose money over Mina? Nathan didn't answer. He just stood there looking torn, and I realized he was actually considering it. He was considering leaving me at home while he went to family events with Ophelia there. He was considering Helen's conditions because the money mattered that much. I grabbed my coat and walked out. Nathan called after me, but I kept going. Got in my car and drove back to our apartment alone. About an hour later, Nathan came home and tried to explain that he just needed time to think about options, that we needed to be smart about this. I said, there's nothing to think about. Your mother wants you to choose, and you're considering choosing her. He said, that's not fair. He's trying to find a solution that doesn't destroy our financial future. I said, our financial future means nothing if you're willing to let your mother dictate our marriage. He got frustrated and said I was being unrealistic about money, that we couldn't just survive on pride and principles. Said his student loan payment was due in 2 weeks and we had $400 in our checking account. We fought for 3 hours. He kept saying we needed to be practical, and I kept saying his mother was trying to break us up and he was letting her. Finally, he said he was going to the New Year's Eve party whether I came or not because he needed to maintain some family relationships. I asked if Ophelia would be there and he said probably, but that wasn't the point. I said it's exactly the point. Your mother is using her to replace me and you're too worried about money to see it. That was 4 days ago and he's barely spoken to me since. He sleeps on the couch and leaves for work early. Yesterday, I saw he'd texted Savannah asking if she thought he was being unreasonable, and Savannah had replied that she understood his position even though she disagreed with it. So apparently even his sister, who supposedly supported me, thinks he should consider Helen's conditions. Then this morning, I was at the grocery store and ran into Helen's friend from the club. She smiled at me and said she'd heard Nathan was coming to New Year's Eve after all, and wasn't that wonderful. Said Helen had mentioned that Nathan and I were working through some differences and she hoped we could resolve them maturely. I just stared at her because Helen was already spreading the narrative that I was the problem holding Nathan back. I got home and Nathan was packing a bag. Said he was going to stay at Archie's place for a few days to get some space and clear his head. I asked if this was it, if he was choosing them. He said he wasn't choosing anyone, he was trying to figure out how to make everything work. I said it doesn't work, you can't have both. Your mother made that very clear. He left anyway. So now I'm sitting here alone wondering if my marriage just ended because I wouldn't let my mother-in-law treat me like trash in exchange for money. Nathan's been texting me saying he just needs time to think, but I know what's happening. Helen's in his ear talking about our financial situation, and Ophelia's probably being sympathetic and available. And I'm supposed to just sit here and wait while he decides if I'm worth giving up his trust fund for. The New Year's Eve party is tomorrow night. Nathan hasn't told me if he's definitely going, but I'm assuming he is, since he packed nice clothes. which means he'll be there with Ophelia while Helen parades them around, and I'll be sitting at home like the wife who wasn't good enough to bring. I don't know what to do. Do I wait and see if he comes to his senses? Do I pack my stuff and leave before he makes his choice obvious? Everyone keeps telling me to be patient, but how patient am I supposed to be while his family actively works to destroy our marriage, and he stands there considering their offers? This is so much worse than I thought it would be. Last update. Okay, so after my last post where Nathan was at Archie's planning to go to the New Year's Eve party, a bunch of you told me to stop waiting around and start making my own decisions. You were right. New Year's Eve morning, I decided I was done. I got dressed and drove straight to Helen's house. I walked right past her into the party while she was greeting guests. She couldn't make a scene with 30 people watching, so she positioned Ophelia next to Nathan all night and made sure everyone saw me as the crasher. At dinner, there was no place card for me. I sat at the main table anyway. Helen demanded I move to the overflow table. I refused. She told Charles to remove me, then Archie. Nathan finally told everyone to stop. That's when Ophelia spoke up and explained that Helen had told her Nathan's marriage was struggling, and he'd expressed doubts about whether he'd made the right choice. Helen thought reminding Nathan of other options might help him reconsider. I looked at Nathan. Did you tell your mother you had doubts about marrying me? His face gave him away. He admitted it was one conversation when we were fighting about money, a few months back after that huge fight about his student loans. So while I was figuring out how we could manage financially, he was telling his mother he should have married someone richer. Helen interrupted, insisting Nathan had come to her multiple times expressing concern about maintaining his lifestyle with someone from my background. She'd been facilitating a graceful way for him to correct his mistake. I grabbed my coat and left with Savannah. We loaded my stuff that night and I drove to my mom's house in Norfolk. That was a week ago. I thought that was the end. Nathan's been texting constantly apologizing. Helen's been texting him demanding he fix things. I ignored all of it. But yesterday afternoon, I was in my mom's kitchen when there was a knock at the door. My mom answered and I heard Helen's voice. Helen was standing on my mom's front porch. She'd driven 90 minutes to get there. My mom asked what she wanted. Helen announced she needed to speak with me about the situation with Nathan. My mom tried closing the door, but Helen put her hand on it, insisting this concerned her son's future, and she wasn't leaving until we had an adult conversation. I came to the door and asked Helen what the hell she was doing at my mom's house. She looked past me into the house like she was inspecting it, and explained we needed to discuss separation terms since I'd filed paperwork without consulting Nathan properly. My mom ordered her to leave our property. Helen ignored her completely and kept talking about how I was being unreasonable and vindictive. The family had consulted with their attorney and had concerns about how I was handling things. I asked what concerns. Helen pulled out an actual printed list of items she claimed I'd taken from the apartment that belonged to Nathan or were purchased with family money. The coffee maker, throw pillows, a lamp. My mom lost it. She told Helen to get off our porch with her ridiculous list and stop harassing her daughter. Helen looked at my mom like she'd just noticed her and warned that if I insisted on being difficult, they'd pursue legal action for theft of property. I laughed right in her face. She'd driven all the way here to threaten me over a coffee maker? Helen snapped that it wasn't about the coffee maker. It was about me understanding that actions have consequences. My mom stepped between us and told Helen she had 10 seconds to leave before she called the police. Helen shot back, "Go ahead and call them." She'd be happy to explain to law enforcement that I'd stolen property and abandoned my legal residence. My mom pointed out I didn't abandon anything. I left an emotionally abusive situation. Helen's face went cold. She warned that abusive was a strong word, and I should be careful about making accusations that could be considered slander. Then she looked at my mom and remarked she could see where I learned my dramatic tendencies and lack of respect for social boundaries. My mom told Helen to get the hell off her property. Helen glanced around at our neighborhood and observed that this house was exactly what she'd expected, that it explained so much about why I'd never understood basic standards of behavior. She noted she'd wondered what kind of environment produced someone so grasping and inappropriate. I was done. I told Helen she could insult me all she wanted, but she wasn't going to stand on my mom's porch insulting my family and our home. Helen claimed she wasn't insulting anything, simply observing that some people were raised with certain values and others weren't. My mom walked right up to Helen and got in her face. "Listen, you miserable witch, my daughter has more class and character in her little finger than your entire family combined. You've spent 4 years trying to break her down because you're a controlling nightmare who can't stand that your son chose someone you can't manipulate. Now get off my property before I make you leave." Helen stepped back and declared this explained everything, that this level of hostility was clearly what I'd been taught growing up. My mom responded that what she was taught was to stand up to bullies, and Helen was the biggest bully she'd ever met. That's when Nathan's car pulled into the driveway. He got out, looking stressed, and asked what was going on. Helen immediately complained that I was being completely unreasonable and refusing to have a rational discussion. Nathan asked why I wouldn't just talk to his mother. I demanded to know why his mother was at my mother's house harassing us. Helen insisted she wasn't harassing anyone. Nathan suggested we all go inside and talk calmly. My mom refused absolutely. Helen wasn't welcome in her home. Nathan tried saying we all needed to be mature about this. My mom asked if it was mature for his mother to drive to Norfolk to threaten her daughter over household items. Nathan defended his mom, claiming she was just trying to protect family assets. Helen pulled out her list again and started reading items. I told her she could have all of it. Every single thing, she could have it. I didn't want anything that reminded me of her family or the 4 years I spent being treated like trash. Nathan flinched. He protested that nobody treated me like trash. My mom made a noise that was almost a laugh and reminded him his mother threw wine in my face and made me sit on a plastic patio chair at Christmas dinner. Nathan muttered I was making it sound worse than it was. My mom asked how much worse could it be than being called street garbage and having his ex-girlfriend positioned as my replacement at every family event. Helen announced enough of this, that I'd poisoned everyone against her by playing the victim. She told Nathan he could see now why this marriage was never going to work, that I came from a family that thrived on drama instead of resolving issues properly. My mom stepped forward again and pointed out the only person who thrived on drama was Helen, showing up uninvited to other people's homes with lists and threats. Helen retorted that at least she knew how to conduct herself with dignity instead of screaming on front porches like trashy people. That's when Savannah's car pulled up. She immediately asked what Helen was doing there. Helen explained she was trying to have an adult conversation, but clearly that was impossible with this family. Savannah reminded her she'd told her to leave me alone, that she'd done enough damage. Helen turned on Savannah, disappointed she was taking sides against her own family. Savannah clarified she wasn't taking sides, she was standing up for what was right. Nathan begged everyone to calm down. He looked at me and suggested we needed to figure out a way forward that didn't involve his entire family falling apart. I responded his family was falling apart because his mother couldn't accept that he'd married someone she didn't approve of. Helen insisted she'd tried to accept it for 4 years, tried to help me fit into their world, but I'd fought her at every turn. My mom helped her fit in by humiliating her at every opportunity, by inviting Nathan's ex-girlfriend to family events, by telling people she'd trapped him with a fake pregnancy. Nathan's head snapped toward his mother, asking if she'd really told people that. Helen maintained she'd expressed concerns to close friends about the circumstances of our marriage. Savannah interjected that she'd told half the garden club I'd poked holes in condoms. Nathan looked sick, asking why she would say something like that. Helen declared she'd been trying to protect him from making a mistake. And clearly she'd been right, because look where we were now. I told Nathan this was exactly why I was done. His mother had spent years trying to destroy our marriage and he'd let her. Helen interrupted, claiming actually he had discussed divorce as an option several times and she'd been trying to help him see alternatives. Savannah yelled, "Mom, stop lying. You've been planning this since they got engaged." I'd had enough. I told Helen my house and my neighborhood and my family were worth 100 of her fake polite society friends. She was a miserable person who controlled everyone with money because that was the only way she could keep people around. And Nathan had been so desperate for her approval that he'd sacrificed his marriage for it. Helen announced if I was done with this ridiculous display, we could discuss the separation terms. She had papers her attorney prepared. Very generous terms considering the short marriage and the fact that I'd contributed relatively little financially. My mom grabbed the papers out of Helen's hand and ripped them up, just tore them in half and dropped them on the driveway. She declared her daughter had her own attorney and wouldn't be signing anything Helen's people prepared. Helen said that destroying legal documents was probably criminal. My mom responded that her daughter knew her worth and wouldn't let people treat her like garbage. What did Helen raise? A son who values money more than his wife. Nathan asked if that's really what she thought of our family. Helen confirmed she thought our family lacked the breeding and background to understand their world, and she'd been proven right. I told Nathan I was done with his mother's insults and his inability to defend me. Helen declared finally I was making sense. My mom ordered Helen off the property and warned if she came back she was filing a restraining order. Helen looked at Nathan, expecting him to do something. He just stood there. She asked if he was going to let his wife and her family treat her this way. Nathan said quietly that maybe she should go. Helen's face went white. After everything she'd done for him, all the support and money, he was choosing them over her. Nathan murmured he wasn't choosing anyone. He was asking her to leave because this was out of control. Helen warned him if she left like this, things would change. The trust fund, the family support, all of it. Nathan acknowledged he knew what she meant. She asked if he was really willing to give all that up. He didn't answer. Helen got in her car and left. It's been 3 days. Nathan's been texting that Helen cut him off completely. He's panicking about money. Helen sent a message saying I'd turned her children against her and destroyed her family. I filed for divorce yesterday. Nathan called crying, saying we needed counseling, that he'd cut off his family, that he'd do whatever it took. I told him it was too late. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. When someone won't defend you, that tells you everything. Nathan can figure out his life without his mother's money, and I'm building my own life where nobody gets to make me feel less than ever again.